It started as just another court hearing. But within seconds, it turned into something no one in that room would forget. The woman standing trial for one of the most disturbing murders in recent history lunged, not at a guard, not at the judge, but at her own lawyer. Shackled and enraged, she moved fast, wrapping her hands around his shoulders as deputies scrambled to restrain her. Papers flew. Chairs scraped. The courtroom filled with shouts. The man she attacked wasn't a prosecutor. He was there to defend her. But that moment, caught on video, burned into headlines, was not the worst thing she had done. The worst thing happened months earlier. Inside a quiet Wisconsin home. In a basement where the lights flickered and a mother waited upstairs, completely unaware of the horror taking place just below her feet. Shad Thyrion was 25 years old. He had a gentle face and a soft voice. People who knew him say he was thoughtful, quiet. He still lived with his mother in Green Bay. He trusted Taylor Schabusiness. He let her into the house. He never expected to die that night. And he certainly never expected to be taken apart, one piece at a time. Inside that basement, according to police reports, the two had smoked meth. They were intimate. But then something shifted. No one knows the exact moment the mood changed. But what happened next was beyond any ordinary idea of violence. She told detectives she strangled him. At first with her hands. Then with a chain. She said she didn't stop. Even after he passed out. Even after he was clearly no longer breathing. She kept going. When she was done, she didn't call for help. She didn't cry. She didn't leave. She began cutting. His throat. His torso. His stomach. She opened his body with chilling precision. Not out of panic. Not to hide a weapon. But to explore. She pulled out organs. With her bare hands. She later described it without emotion. She said it felt good. She said it was fun. The human body is not easy to dismantle. It takes time. It takes force. It takes a kind of calm that no one should be capable of in that situation. When officers arrived, they didn't find a typical crime scene. There was no body on the floor. There was no pool of blood with a murder weapon beside it. What they found was chaos in fragments. A plastic bin filled with body parts. A storage bag with muscle and bone. A severed foot in one corner of the room. And in a bucket, near the stairs, his head. Just sitting there. Covered. Quiet. The floor was soaked. The tools she used, scissors, knives, blades, were left behind without care. She hadn't cleaned anything. She had no plans to run. Upstairs, his mother had been searching the house. She's the one who opened the basement door and saw the bucket. She's the one who called 911. The dispatcher could barely make sense of her words. She was shaking. Breathing fast. Trying to describe something that no parent should ever have to witness. What kind of person does this? What kind of person kills, and then decides the killing wasn't enough? The medical examiner said the dissection was deliberate. This wasn't a case of panic and disposal. This was hands-on. Prolonged. Personal. When Taylor was later interviewed, she gave vague answers. She shrugged. Smiled. Laughed at moments that didn't call for it. She said she'd blacked out. Then said she remembered everything. Then claimed again that she didn't. But she admitted one thing, she never planned to stop. She told officers she had more body parts to collect. She said she was still playing with him. That line, those words, stunned even the most experienced detectives. This wasn't a moment of rage. It was a night of destruction. And it didn't end in that basement. It followed them all to the courtroom. Because months later, when she appeared in front of a judge, she attacked again, right in front of everyone. Now the question is no longer about what happened. We know that already. The question is, why? Why would someone do this to another human being? Why would they describe it like a game? Why would they return to court with the same violence still in their hands? This is Bruised Voice, and this story is not just about crime. It's about what remains when all sense of fear, guilt, and control are gone. Subscribe. Like. Comment with your theory, and tell us where you're watching from. The courtroom lights are still on. The case is closed. But the questions are just beginning. His name was Shad Thyrion. Not a celebrity. Not a criminal. Just a 25-year-old man living in a quiet neighborhood in Green Bay, Wisconsin. A young man whose life ended not in silence, but in cruelty beyond comprehension. He wasn't looking for fame. He wasn't looking for danger. He lived with his mother in a modest house that sat between two narrow streets lined with trees that still swayed even after his blood was washed away. That home wasn't filled with wealth. It wasn't perfect. But it was his. Shad was someone who didn't take up too much space in the room. But when he smiled, people noticed. He had that kind of light, not loud, not blinding, just steady. A quiet flame. His life hadn't always been easy. He had faced problems like anyone else his age. But he was trying. He was still here. And that mattered. He had dreams. Not massive ones. He wasn't trying to change the world. He just wanted to get better. Get stronger. Find some direction. Start again. He had plans to move forward. He didn't get the chance. He stayed close to his mother, Tara. They had a bond that went deeper than most people understood. She didn't just raise him, she supported him in every way she could. He confided in her. She was his anchor. His safe place. In return, he made sure she never felt alone in that house. They cooked together. Watched shows together. She knew the sound of his footsteps. The sound of his laugh. And eventually, the sound of silence when he wasn't there. Shad was trusting. Sometimes too trusting. He believed in giving people another shot. He didn't always see danger. Not because he was naive. But because he wanted to believe that people were better than their worst choices. And then, she came back into his life. Taylor Schabusiness. This isn't the part where we talk about tragedy from both sides. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not a mistake. This is not two broken people dragging each other down. This is the part where someone walked into a house and chose destruction. Taylor didn't bring sadness. She didn't bring chaos. She brought calculation. She brought something that can't be explained away by drugs or mental breakdowns. She brought death. And more than that, she brought desecration. She didn't see Shad as a person. Not in that moment. Maybe not ever. She saw him as a possession. And when he stopped breathing, she didn't stop. That's the horror of it. She kept going. She stayed. She acted with her hands, with her tools, with her mind fully engaged. This wasn't fast. It wasn't clumsy. It was hands-on, deliberate destruction of a human body. But back up. Before that basement turned into a slaughterhouse, there was a young man upstairs who had no idea that this was going to be the last night he would see light. He let her into his space. Into the home where his mother rested just feet away. He allowed her to share a room with him. That act of trust would be his undoing. He didn't scream. He couldn't. She cut off his ability to speak. To breathe. And then she stayed with his corpse, hours, methodically dissecting him. But this section isn't about that night. It's about who he was before it. Shad didn't have a criminal record. He wasn't violent. He wasn't known for outbursts or erratic behavior. He wasn't in gangs. He didn't carry weapons. His only weapon was kindness. He had a soft presence and an open door. He had friends. He had people who cared. He wasn't lost. He wasn't isolated. He had moments of hope. He had conversations about the future. He had laughter. He had routines. He wasn't someone preparing for an end, he was looking for a beginning. He loved music. He connected with lyrics more than most. They helped him say the things he couldn't express out loud. His room had posters. His phone had playlists. He had people who texted him just to check in. That's how connected he was. That's how loved he was. But love wasn't enough to stop what happened. Not when he was trapped in a room with someone who didn't feel it. Not when the last person he saw looked him in the eyes and did nothing to help. Taylor Schabusiness didn't arrive in that house by accident. She had a history. She had choices. And what she chose was to take someone who had done nothing to her, and erase him. His mother didn't find him in his bed. She found what was left. Because Taylor didn't leave a body. She left parts. She didn't leave him lying in peace. She left him in containers. Shad wasn't just killed. He was stripped of dignity, cut into pieces, and scattered like trash in the home where he once felt safe. His name is Shad Thyrion. And this story, this brutal, haunting story, only happened because someone he trusted made a decision to destroy him. Not in a moment of confusion. Not by accident. But because she wanted to. She had been using meth for a while. Not once. Not twice. Over and over again. Taylor Schabusiness had long stepped off the edge most people never even approach. Her judgment had vanished months before. Her behavior had become reckless, violent, and disturbing. But no one imagined it would get this far. She had a husband. She had a child. But neither of them were with her that night. She was with Shad. They had reconnected weeks earlier, two people with a history, one of them descending fast into chaos, the other too kind to walk away. She brought drugs. He didn't resist. He wanted peace. She brought destruction. On the night of February 21st, 2022, they met in his mother's house. Tara wasn't home at first. Shad let Taylor in through the back. The basement was where they usually spent time. It offered privacy. No eyes. No interruptions. No one to hear what would happen next. They smoked meth together. They had sex. It wasn't the first time. But it would be the last. She brought with her a metal chain. She would later tell detectives it was for pleasure. A fantasy. Something they agreed on. But what started as intimacy twisted into something vile. Taylor didn't stop when he asked her to. She didn't stop when he passed out. She didn't stop when he was no longer conscious. She tightened the chain around his neck and pulled. She used her hands when that wasn't enough. Then she pressed down with her full body weight, keeping it there long after he stopped moving. But the killing wasn't the end. She stood up. She walked across the room. She picked up knives. Scissors. A bread knife at first. Then sharper tools. Tools meant for the kitchen. She began cutting. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She stayed calm. She sliced open his chest. Tore into his stomach. Removed parts of him. Organs. Flesh. She put his legs to the side. His foot. His lungs. His heart. His insides were no longer inside. The room smelled like chemicals, blood, and something else, something rotten. His head was removed. She placed it in a bucket. Carried it up the basement stairs. Set it next to a mattress. Then returned to the basement to continue what she had started. She spoke about this later. In a tone that wasn't afraid. She laughed in the police car. She joked about forgetting his legs. She said she liked it. That she enjoyed the experience. She stayed for hours. She played with his body. Left what remained of him in pieces. When she was done, she didn't hide. She didn't leave town. She didn't even try to clean. The next morning, Shad's mother returned home. She couldn't find her son. She called his name. She looked in the kitchen. His phone was still there. She went downstairs. She saw the bucket first. She removed the blanket on top. She ran. The 911 call was breathless. A mother's voice cracked open. Her words were broken, confused. She didn't know how to explain what she had seen. Because no one prepares to describe their child like that. Not in fragments. The officers arrived quickly. They had been told it was bad. They weren't told it would be the worst thing they'd ever see. They searched the basement. They found the torso. Limbs nearby. Bloody tools scattered. Pieces in bags. Some in bins. They were looking for Shad. Instead, they found pieces of him, laid out like garbage. The air was heavy. The blood was thick. The floor was stained. It wasn't just a murder. It was mutilation. Every inch of the room was marked. Taylor was found later at another home. She was high. Covered in dried blood. Her clothes stuck to her skin. She was calm when they cuffed her. She laughed during booking. She said they'd have fun trying to clean the mess. She spoke like it was a game. As if it hadn't been real. As if a life hadn't been lost. During the interview, she talked about still playing with the body. She said she never planned to stop. She said she liked the power. And then she closed her eyes, and fell asleep. When the autopsy was performed, the examiner had to list body parts separately. He had to confirm identity through what was left. This wasn't passion. This wasn't fury. This was annihilation. The headlines called it dismemberment. But that word doesn't explain what happened. It doesn't describe what it takes to cut through bone. To handle a body like meat. To keep going long after death. To smile after. The house was quiet now. The light in the basement turned off. The floor was cold. The mother sat in shock upstairs. Her son was gone. Her boy. Not just dead. Not just murdered. Erased. This wasn't just another crime in Wisconsin. This was a waking nightmare. One that started with a knock at the door and ended with a bucket filled with horror. There was no warning. No scream. Just silence. And then blood. And for Shad Thyrion, there would be no tomorrow. Inside the patrol car, the audio recorded her rambling, fast, disconnected. She said she blacked out. Then she remembered everything. Then she didn't again. She laughed. She hummed. She talked about forgetting Shad's legs. About how much effort it took to remove his head. How she left his foot because she was tired. She sounded like someone describing a recipe. Not a murder. At the station, officers led her into a holding room. Cameras caught her sitting still. Then laughing again. Then sleeping. As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't cut open a person and pulled them apart. The detectives tried to understand. They went back to the house. They brought in forensics. They cataloged everything. A bread knife. A hunting blade. A pair of scissors. A serrated saw. Each object was covered in blood, some with hair still stuck to the metal. Some were bent from pressure. Each one had been used. There were bags. Garbage bags. One in the basement. One in a separate room. Each contained pieces. Muscle. Skin. Parts of the man Shad had been. In one corner, the torso. On the floor, what remained of his chest cavity. Empty. The coroner had to work from fragments. He matched wounds to the weapons. He estimated time of death. He said the body had been handled after rigor mortis. That decomposition had already started by the time it was found. That organs were missing. She had cut him open like meat. In the interrogation room, Taylor spoke like she wasn't even there. She drifted between memories. She said Shad had asked for it. Then she said he didn't fight back. Then she said she was just trying to have fun. The detective leaned in. Asked if she felt sorry. Her face didn't change. He asked what made her stop. She shrugged. Said she got bored. They tested her for substances. She had meth in her system. A lot of it. But even that didn't explain what she'd done. Not completely. The mind may become confused, but it doesn't invent the method. What she did took thought. It took time. It took intent. They called in psychologists. She was evaluated. She was calm. Articulate. She knew where she was. Knew what she'd done. She said she wasn't insane. Then said maybe she was. Then smiled again. One jail officer reported she spoke to herself at night. Another said she barely ate. Then laughed at jokes only she understood. Her mood shifted. But her story didn't. She killed him. She cut him up. She would have kept going. One detective described it later like this: we weren't investigating a crime scene. We were walking through a slaughterhouse. Except this wasn't livestock. This was a human being. They pieced together a timeline. Shad invited her in around 9 p.m. They smoked meth. Around midnight, the strangling began. By 1 a.m., he was gone. She didn't stop until morning. The last cut came around 7:30 a.m. That's 8 hours. 8 hours of breaking a body apart while his mother was nearby. While people slept just down the street. While the world moved on, completely unaware that one of its sons was being shredded into unrecognizable parts. She never cried. Not once. The timeline made it worse. The details made it worse. Every piece of evidence made it worse. There were no screams. No mercy. Only one person with complete control, and no care for what that meant. The courtroom is supposed to be the last safe space in a case like this. A place where words replace weapons. Where the system takes control from the violent. Where grief is handled through law, not more chaos. But that's not what happened when Taylor Schabusiness entered that courtroom. It was a hearing. Just a routine pretrial appearance. That's what they called it. Routine. She sat in her seat, shackled, expression flat. Her hair was tied back. Her hands were chained. Her lawyer, Quinn Jolly, was seated right next to her. He didn't flinch. He didn't expect anything. And then, with no warning, she turned. In. She stood. She snarled. She launched her entire body at her own attorney. Her wrists were cuffed, but it didn't matter. She used her full weight. Slammed him against the wall. Clawed at his shoulders. The chair crashed to the floor. Papers flew. Security rushed in. And still, she fought. This wasn't a slap. This wasn't a push. This was rage with no reason. Fury that didn't care who it hit. She screamed. Her lawyer yelled for help. Deputies tackled her. It took 2 grown men to hold her down. They had to drag her out of the courtroom, her body thrashing, her eyes wild. One of them later said it was like trying to hold down an animal that no longer feared pain. And still, this was the same person the court was trying to defend. This was the person they were arguing over: competency, motive, guilt. Taylor Schabusiness didn't attack the prosecutor. She didn't attack a stranger. She went after her own legal representative. The man speaking for her in court. The man standing between her and a maximum sentence. That tells you something. Because if she could do that to him, in public, on camera, in a courtroom, what do you think she was capable of behind closed doors? When no one was watching. When no one could stop her. This wasn't her first act of violence. It wasn't her worst. But it was the moment that finally ripped the mask off for anyone still trying to make sense of her. There were people who wanted to believe the drugs made her do it. People who said she didn't know what she was doing. That she was confused. Lost. Broken. But there, in that courtroom, we saw her. Clear. Alert. Aware. And brutal. She wasn't out of control. She was focused. Her attack was fast. Precise. Intentional. The judge had to call for a recess. The hearing stopped. Security protocols were changed. Her attorney requested to be removed from the case. And no one blamed him. The public watched the footage when it hit the internet. Millions saw it. Some couldn't believe it. Others weren't surprised. But everyone agreed on one thing: whatever this woman was, she was dangerous. The charges had already been horrifying. First-degree intentional homicide. Mutilation of a corpse. Third-degree sexual assault. But this added a new question. If she could attack in front of the law, what else was she capable of? Her defense team tried to refocus the court. They pushed for a mental evaluation. Argued she wasn't competent to stand trial. They said the meth had warped her mind. That she was incapable of understanding right from wrong. But footage showed something different. She made eye contact. She listened. She followed courtroom protocol. She laughed at certain comments. Then exploded in violence. And when she was dragged away, she didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't even ask what would happen next. The psychiatric reports came in. She was diagnosed with multiple disorders. Some pointed to psychosis. Others said she was fully aware. The court ruled her competent. And the trial moved forward. They brought in testimony. From police. From forensic experts. From the medical examiner who had to piece together Shad's remains like a puzzle that no one wanted to finish. Photos were shown. Witnesses cried. But Taylor didn't. Not once. She watched. She blinked. She sat back. The prosecutors laid it out plainly. This was not a crime of passion. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate act of domination. An act of evil so severe, even trained officers left the scene shaken. Her defense fought back. But after the courtroom attack, the tone had changed. There was no saving her image. No one was buying the idea of confusion anymore. The jury didn't need much time. Taylor Schabusiness was found guilty. The sentence was life in prison without parole. Not because she snapped. Not because she was high. But because she knew. She knew what she was doing. She knew how to hurt. She knew how to silence. And she did it again, in front of everyone, just to remind the world that control still belonged to her. Now she sits behind bars. But even there, the memory of what she did lingers. To anyone watching this now. If you've ever sat in a courtroom. If you've ever trusted the system to protect you. Imagine watching a killer turn on her own lawyer and wonder. What would she have done if no one was there to stop her? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And let us know, should someone this violent be allowed to breathe free air ever again? This is Bruised Voice. And the story isn't over yet. There is no happy ending in a story like this. There is no healing, no closure, no day where things go back to normal. Not when someone like Taylor Schabusiness has walked through your town and left behind what she did. She was sentenced to life in prison. No parole. No second chance. She will never see daylight as a free person again. But the problem is, she never cared about that. Not then. Not now. She didn't flinch when the verdict came down. She didn't cry when they listed out every bone she had separated. She didn't react when they showed the photos of Shad's body in bags, in bins, in buckets. There was no apology. There was no explanation. She was told she would die in prison, and she smiled. This wasn't madness. This wasn't a blackout. This wasn't someone who lost control and wept in regret the morning after. This was a person who wanted to cause pain, and then wanted to remember it. Court psychologists who examined her spoke about dissociation. About an empty emotional baseline. About someone whose violence was not reactive, but calculated. They used words like predatory effect. Words that don't describe outbursts, but patterns. She remembered details. She described actions step by step. She laughed when retelling how she discarded pieces of Shad like trash. How she stuffed him into corners. How she didn't bother to hide what she had done. This wasn't impulsive. This was controlled destruction. Her interviews revealed something even worse than violence: enjoyment. She said it felt good. That's the line most people can't forget. That it felt good. If you've ever felt fear, true fear, you know it lives in the unknown. But what do you do when the fear becomes real, and it has a name, a face, and it sits calmly behind a courtroom desk, looking bored? She didn't cry for herself. She didn't cry for Shad. She just sat there, waiting. And when it was over, and the sentence had been read, she was let out like a prisoner, but she moved like someone who had won. Because in her mind, she still had control. She had taken everything she wanted, and left nothing behind. Shad's family was never the same. His mother, Tara, was the one who found the bucket. The one who saw what no parent should ever see. The one who had to sit in court and hear a woman explain, in chilling calm, how she tore her son apart. There's no word for that kind of grief. It doesn't fit into categories. It doesn't get better. It just sits inside you, clawing at your chest every single day. Shad's father couldn't speak to the press for weeks. And when he finally did, he broke down in front of the microphone. His voice didn't carry anger. It carried disbelief. How do you explain something that evil? Memorials were set up in Green Bay. Photos. Candles. Messages. But the quiet behind them was deafening. This wasn't just a tragedy. This was a horror that walked into their neighborhood, smiled, and stayed. Neighbors locked their doors tighter. Parents didn't let their kids walk home alone anymore. People looked at each other differently. Because if someone like Taylor Schabusiness could live among them unnoticed, how many more are out there? Former prosecutors called the case one of the most gruesome in Wisconsin history. Veteran officers who had handled murders, shootings, assaults, they said nothing had prepared them for this. That it wasn't the body. It wasn't the blood. It was the cold enjoyment she showed in the aftermath. Taylor never cried. She never flinched. She never cared. Now she sits behind concrete walls. Surrounded by guards. Surrounded by bars. But even from there, she leaves a mark. Because it wasn't just a murder. It was a message. No one is safe, not even from the people they know. So now we ask you. Do you believe someone like this is made, or born? Is this the result of drugs, trauma, and mental illness? Or is this something worse, something that chooses to hurt, because it can? Let us know in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And tell us this, how do you sleep, knowing people like her exist? This is Bruised Voice. We don't just cover true crime. We ask the questions that stay in your mind when the screen goes black. You think the story is over. But it's not. Because what happened inside that house, inside that courtroom, inside her, doesn't stay locked away. Not really. It stays here. In your thoughts. In your sleep. In the echo of her laugh. And now it's with you. This wasn't a crime of heat. It wasn't a moment of confusion. This was slow. Intentional. Carved into reality by someone who didn't blink while tearing a human being apart. There was no struggle in her voice when she described what she did. No tremble. No second guessing. She remembered every piece. Every cut. Every hour. She said it clearly, she liked it. That should be enough to keep you up at night. Because if a person can say that, after sawing into bone. After filling plastic bags with human remains. After placing a head in a bucket and sitting down to relax. Then the question is no longer about crime. It's about what lives behind the eyes of someone who doesn't see you as real. What do you call that? Not mental illness. Not addiction. Not trauma. Call it what it is. Evil. And now ask yourself this. How many people have you met that laughed at the wrong time? Who stared a little too long? Who didn't flinch at pain? How close have you been? Because Taylor Schabusiness wasn't a stranger in the woods. She wasn't hiding in a mask. She walked through neighborhoods. Sat across from people. Held a child. Shook hands. And one day, she strangled a man who trusted her, then opened him like meat. And didn't stop. Not because she had to. But because she wanted to. You need to understand. The scariest part of this story isn't the blood. It's that she enjoyed it. And if no one had stopped her, she would have done it again. She planned to. She said that herself. She was still playing. That is the monster. That's what you should be afraid of. Not in the woods. Not in the news. But in the chair next to you. In someone's home. In someone's arms. And now we ask you. What do you believe made her that way? Have you ever seen a face like hers and ignored the warning signs? Have you trusted someone who made your stomach turn later? Do you think this was the result of madness, or the act of a person who simply stopped seeing life as sacred? Tell us in the comments. Not because we need the engagement. But because stories like this demand to be spoken about. Or they happen again. This is Bruised Voice. Where we don't just report the horror. We leave it with you. Because sometimes, it's not the blood that stains. It's the fact that someone smiled. while they caused it. Stay awake. Stay aware. And ask yourself one last thing. How would you have stopped her? We'll see you in the next story.